Hey guys, Stefan here. So today I wanted to do a video about the Weiss cryptocurrency ratings and why I think that there are some pretty bad flaws in the way that they're looking at things. So it's clear that they've done a lot of analysis, but there's still some pretty glaring flaws. So I think it's important to consider that, they are obviously quite intelligent and pretty well qualified. I mean, they've got like PhDs and they're econometricians and so on. They're not complete fools, right? But they're just not analyzing things from the correct point of view, which is obviously, as I believe, the Bitcoin maximalist view. So I'm just going to have a look through some of these articles that they've posted. They initially rated Bitcoin as a C+ compared to some of the other cryptocurrencies, and obviously there was a lot of backlash and a lot of people, and they've moved the ratings around a little bit. But ultimately, here are some of the flaws that I think they have in what they're doing. And I suppose, first of all, let's just talk about the fundamental errors. I think it's really people who are not analyzing Bitcoin from a sound money point of view are going to get it wrong, because you have to first understand why is sound money important. So, as you can see from this first paragraph, or from this first article that I'm just going to look through here, they split it up into 4 indexes, and then each of those indexes have sub-indexes. So they've got comments here around the investment reward and the investment risk. So they're saying, okay, well, look, because it's appreciated so much, it can't appreciate that much more. And look, some of that you can't really disagree with. It's because some of these smaller altcoins are coming off a lower base, so to speak. So it's much easier to move something that's only 1 million market cap compared to Bitcoin now, which is over 100 billion market cap, or it's around 140, 150 billion market cap. So that's, just obvious, right? And the other problem here is, as we've mentioned before, these coin market cap or these Bitcoin dominance index type numbers can be gamed, in that it's easier to game some of these smaller coins, and that it's easy for them to just create some new coin and capture. Right now, particularly in this environment where there's a lot of easy credit, that's just the nature of it. But if you look at it in the long run, this is really going to be more like a musical chairs game, and there's going to be one seed at the end that everybody wants to get to, and that's Bitcoin. So I think part of the problem here is, and I can understand why they're making this error, it's that they're looking at these things like these are all just investments and you should diversify and sort of betting, but really this is not that. This is different. This is money, and money is a special category. What we're doing here is we're basically betting on what we think is most likely to become the global money of the world, as in the global standard, the global medium of exchange, the global unit of account. That's what's at stake here. So couple points. So down here they've got a section on network capacity sub-index. So let me just find that. Yep, so that's this section here. And so they're basically talking about how, okay, Bitcoin needs to have, or whatever cryptocurrency needs to have, a very high throughput on-chain, and the transactions need to be cheap. Therefore, you should look at the number of transactions in the blockchain, blah, blah, blah. But the problem here is they're not approaching this from the right angle, because again, they are thinking of this like it's a payment network. But really, you've got to think of this as a sound money. The sound money can be different to the payment network rail that sound money travels on, right? So our vision really is more like Bitcoin is the sound money, it's the base layer, and people build other layers up on top of that. Whether that's Lightning Network, which is another layer too, which is an example of a higher layer than Bitcoin, or banks just do that role. Retail banks do that role for customers in the future, and they would still settle amongst each other onto the actual Bitcoin blockchain. So that's, I think, one example of how they're falling victim to this payment networks ideology almost. They're not that, and that's not the important factor. That's not the thing that you should be paying attention to. Another point now, which is just down in the technology index on this article. So they're talking about, okay, obviously technologies have to evolve over time, and they're making a point here that, okay, they're basically making an argument here that, oh, okay, Bitcoin is only doing money, and all these other things are trying to do more and more and more things. So issue shares, run public services, blah, blah, blah. They're adding more and more things, and they're saying, oh, well, look, Bitcoin's not quite ready for that future. Maybe they could add other features on top, but so far it looks like, it may not happen on Bitcoin, right? And so now they temper this argument by saying, well, okay, look, all of our ratings move around a lot, and this is just our current assessment of that. But even there, I would suggest that is coming from the wrong frame of view. I would suggest a better way to think about this is the Unix philosophy. Do one thing and do it well. So it's I think it's a really clever point, because it's basically saying that you shouldn't try to be all things to all people. And that's what Bitcoin is doing well. It's doing one thing well, it's doing sound money well. Anything else, you're going to build a layer on top of Bitcoin. It's like building a house. You don't build your castle on sand. You want a good, strong foundation that you can then build on top of. And that's what we think of Bitcoin as. So in a sense, the error is that they have not considered the settlement layer or the high power money vision of Bitcoin. So they're thinking things like, oh, but the future value of Ethereum and so on could be more than money. But that's wrong, because the market for global wealth storage in 2017, as you can see here on this article, is about 280 trillion US. That is literally the largest market. So you just have to think about it from that point of view. So anyway, let's now look at this other one. So they've got a sustainability index point. So the other point here is they're saying, okay, it's referred to the governance of that network or of that cryptocurrency. The difference here is Bitcoin's governance in some ways is actually superior to other coins. Now, some people think of that like, oh, well, it's really hard to get a new change merged into Bitcoin. But if you think back to what we were saying earlier about that Unix philosophy and doing one thing and doing it well, actually, it's a good thing, because it means there's less arguments about how to deal with this, that, and the other, and it provides greater surety. People who invest into Bitcoin have greater surety about the immutability of Bitcoin's ledger and the immutability of certain factors like the 21 million coin limit. If I said to you, hey, do you want to buy this coin, but actually that coin value might dilute over time massively, you'd be less inclined to buy that coin. Now, if I instead said to you, hey, here is a coin where you have good surety or safety or confidence that this coin will not inflate dramatically over time, well, that coin would be Bitcoin, because there's not that many Bitcoins left to get released in the overarching schedule, and the overarching schedule has a very low inflation rate relative to your alternatives. So that's how you should be thinking about this thing. Bitcoin is peer-to-peer network governance rather than top-down planning. And I might do a video on this in future just to kind of do further analysis and explain this a little bit further. So let's now move on to this next article. So here they basically were backpedaling a little bit, and it's a little bit later. So this article's from March. And anyway, so they're saying now Bitcoin is a B- up from the C+ that it was originally. So a couple of things. One thing is they're pointing out this particular transactions average, right? Or even this one, so the raw number of transactions on the Bitcoin network. However, I think there's a problem in this analysis. That is that because the transactions were hitting the upper limit of the transactions that can happen on chain in Bitcoin, there was now more and more fee pressure. That fee pressure in turn drove a lot of the large exchanges and wallet providers to look into how to use the limited blockchain space per block in a more efficient way. So what they've now done is actually implemented things like transaction batching. So instead of me sending one transaction to person A, B, C, and D, it was more like I'll do one transaction to go to all of those people at the same time. Thus, reducing the number of transactions that hit the ledger, but still increasing the amount of effective transactions. So this number, I think, is not actually accurate. And I think a better number would be to look at this figure from outputs.today, because it's a bit more technical, but basically it's saying that since one transaction can include multiple outputs, the number of total outputs is more important than the number of transactions themselves. That's probably the nice, quick, easy way to explain this concept. So now if you compare what they've got here, where it sort of looks like, okay, it's struggling out, but on this graph, it doesn't look like it's, dramatically fallen that much, right? As you can see, it's still kind of growing. Now, yes, it is true that Bitcoin moves through cycles. So during periods of big price run up, yes, obviously there's a lot of transactions hitting the network. And yeah, okay, right now we're down around $9,000 US from a high of around $20,000 in December. So this is not a big deal in my view. I think it's just a temporary thing, basically. And what we're going to see over the long run is more and more people wanting to use Bitcoin, and not just that, also people using layers above Bitcoin. Even right now, there are many ways that people can do transactions that don't hit the actual blockchain ledger, layer 1, because they're transacting on layers above that. So as an example, Bitcoin transactions amongst people who are on the same custodial wallet, such as a service like Zapper. So you can see on Zapper, they're a very large Bitcoin wallet and vault provider, basically. Transactions between people on Zapper don't necessarily hit the blockchain. So that's just one example. Even transactions amongst Coinbase customers as another big example. So you can see there that it's not that easy to tell what the actual number of Bitcoin transactions are. And the other thing is, remember, from the Bitcoin maximalist point of view, you don't want to transact with Bitcoin right now. You want to buy, you don't want to sell, right? Because our belief is that in the long run, the value of Bitcoin will just be so much higher that it will be basically measured in today's terms, millions of dollars per coin. So you would want to restrict your spending of Bitcoin as much as you possibly could. You would rather spend all your other money first, so that you may hold on to as much of your Bitcoin as you possibly can, right? So the next thing, also here's a good link. I will put this link in the description, but basically it's a nice little exchange or answer on Stack Exchange talking about how does Bitcoin transaction batching work. So it's basically explaining that dynamic of instead doing a new transaction for each person, doing one transaction to pay multiple people. Now the third article I wanted to just quickly talk through, and I might have touched on some of these points before, it was basically one of their response articles to somebody who had responded to them. But I still want to just talk through the way they've tackled the objections, or at least answered back. So here again, argument 1, they're sort of referring to like, we want to identify the coins with the most, it's designed for investors and so on, the most potential for future growth. And again, if you view this from a sound money point of view and which one is the best chance to become sound money, well then Bitcoin is the one with the best potential for future growth. It's just that you have to use the right unit of account. Argument number 2, so they're talking about future value. So they're thinking like, okay, look at the potential future value of Ethereum or Neo and smart contracting and ICO issue. But I think they're making an error here. As an example, they are thinking that, okay, well if you could be smart contracting, maybe that's worth more than just being money. But no, that's wrong. Actually, being money would be even better. As just an example, to make a quick, how big do you think the global wellness industry would be? Well, it's about 3.4 trillion, okay? But how big is the market for money? As we were talking earlier, the global market for money, or at least the global wealth market, is around 280 trillion. Now, if you were to, there's another graph that I could show and basically it's a visual capitalist diagram showing what is yeah, it's this one here. So you can see here, if you look at something like, okay, global broad money. So you can see here this figure, the 90.4 trillion figure, that's saying, measured in US dollars, the total value of the world's money is 90 trillion. So again, you can see there that whether you think about this 90 trillion figure or you think this 280 trillion figure, there is pretty much no market that is bigger than money. Money is if you win that thing, if you win that market, you win everything, pretty much. So that's why I think the way Weiss cryptocurrency have come back on this is not actually right. They're not actually considering what is the addressable market. They've not correctly assessed what that is, in my view. So kind of related to above, they're just saying, okay, you know, Bitcoin's a bit more of a niche player, but really, again, as we were saying before, money is the biggest market there is. So it really is you can't get any bigger than that. So they're basically most of the thoughts on the way Weiss cryptocurrency ratings are looking at Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies. I think the main errors are really those of not considering it from a sound money point of view. So hopefully that has been useful for you guys, and yeah, I'm interested to know if you've got any thoughts, so definitely hit me back up with any comments. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a like or a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks guys, see ya.